Recently on stream I finished the game Omori, and after finishing I added it to my top 25 games of all time. I think the game has done almost everything right, with its superb music, engaging combat, 2 vibrant worlds, some great characters, and its portrayal of anxiety, depression and loss. I said to a friend that unless the game horribly screwed up at the end, this was going to become one to remember. And when I beat it, I was still very happy and emotional with the game, even if the ending had me worried for a while. This is Miri. A bed. This isn't going the direction I think it's going. Is it? Kind of hope not. Miri's been abused. If the way it's going is the way what's been in the back of my mind. She's got cuts, unclean clothes. But in the end, I still thought that the last part of the finale was decent, but I've had a bit of time to think about it since then, and the more I think of it, the more it's soured the whole experience. So before diving in deep, this isn't me hating Omori in general, and if you like the finale, I'm happy for you, but I've had more time to think on why most of the finale disappointed me and understand why I feel negative. Obvious spoiler warning for Omori. Now, instead of recapping the ending and dissecting it that way, instead I will assume you've already played the game and explain my thoughts in bullet points, also known as the 7 deadly issues or something like that. I'm not very original. So let's start with issue number 1. The narrative didn't need a twist. Oh god, is something else bad gonna happen today? I guess that's why F0 even more ominous than normal. With the emotional core of the game already being that the gang struggle to deal with the suicide of Miri and deal with it badly in different ways, the clear direction of the narrative was that they needed to make peace with the passing of Miri in a healthy way, and accept that even if she's gone, they can move on while cherishing and retaining her memory. The only clue there could have been more to her death was Basil's nervousness around the topic and referring to the truth, but this can also be normal around an unexpected suicide. Every person in the group dealt with a death in different and unhealthy ways, and Basil's reaction is totally normal. Some people blame themselves for the suicide of that person, even if it wasn't their fault at all. For example, they could have had a nasty argument at their last conversation and that haunted them. That's both realistic and mature, but the direction they went throws out some of this narrative for something else entirely, and it lessened the impact of a narrative up to this point for me. Even if this game did go the predictable route of a narrative, that's not a bad thing. It's much better to have a narratively satisfying end that you can see coming than a change up that loses track of what the game did best until this point. And this all leads into issue number 2. The game traded maturity for dark themes. It's kind of went a bit darker than I thought it was. I knew it was going to get quite depressing just from the tone of the game, but that's why it tried to go for something this grey or this conflicting. The game up to this part had chosen a very dark and mature theme of suicide and loss, but handled it very well. I felt like, until the ending and the twist, that one of the narrative's best features was that it showed the characters questioning why Miri had died, though in reality the true answer some of the time is that only that person knows, and it's not always brought about by a major event or a fallout or something like that, but, you know, losing to depression. And they have to accept that they may never know, but it's okay to not know and they are not at fault. Miri's suicide already made sense. It didn't need an explanation. What is unspoken is sometimes more powerful than what is said, and I feel that with this twist they lessened the impact of a suicide by making it about something else. It barely even needs to be said that some of the happiest people on the outside can commit suicide. With a twist of the use of suicide to exit white space, this game does not tackle suicide seriously enough. Issue 3. Sonny is made to be a flawed protagonist, or is he? At least for me personally, I don't see it as forgivable as maybe Basil does, because you know, he kind of went a step further when he tried to hide it, even if he was a kid. I understand there aren't many interviews by the creator, especially on, you know, the ending, so I have to wonder what they expected the player to feel about this twist. Are we, as an audience, expected to forgive Sonny? Or are we expected to resent him? Are we expected to make our own decisions on him, that we're expected to be split on this? I wonder about this, mainly because the game seems to give mixed messages. For example, though I chose the default name of Sonny, this game asks you to give a name to that character, likely your own name. I think the themes of depression and anxiety through most of the narrative allows the player to relate to Sonny, as I did, following his struggles, though as we found out later this is mostly guilt instead, I suppose. But when we learn what this Sonny did, if you chose your own name, how are you supposed to still feel attached to this character? It's not the kind of twist like Undertale, for example, where, spoiler warning for Undertale, 3, 2, 1, you don't name your player character, but instead the name of a fallen character that represents power fantasy and control, who you only meet if you made the worst choices possible, your own actions causing this. In this case, you could be stuck with giving your name to a character who did something you would never think to do, making some dissonance between the player and the character of Sonny, or the character you name. I would be more okay with this if the game committed more to truly confronting what Sonny and Basil did. I understand we're in Sonny's mind, and his internal versions of his friends will justify what he did, which is fine, because that's within his head. But the game never really acknowledges the true weight of what Sonny and Basil did. For me, the accidental death can be morally forgivable, but staging the body as a suicide is far beyond that. There is no way to justify that, and I'll talk more about it when I get to the issue number 5 of realism later. But Sonny, even as a minor, could actually face jail time for this, and though I like the ambiguity at the hospital scene with "I have to tell you something," I see no way any of them would forgive him for what he did. He goes beyond an accident and into intentional action. I'm not a legal person, obviously, but surely the death could be classed as something like manslaughter and gotten a lesser sentence, maybe even crime of passion, but not after disguising the body. On stream, I was very confused about Basil, as I thought for certain he was forced into this by Sonny or something. No fucking way. That can't be right. Oh no, that's horrific. I've just figured this out, and I'm really upset. What's happened, Basil was with us, and we basically made him accomplice, and that's why he's as fucked as we are. So this accident happened and we forced Basil to help us. I think this is an accident, right? I don't think this is a conscious thing, but obviously Basil wanted to help him help to hide it, I guess. I mean, yeah, so not under, is it duress? Is that the term that chose to? But I'm pretty sure he would have been scared. But I was corrected by a couple of people in stream, and I also read the secret file messages for the pictures. But this leads me to a whole other issue. Issue number 4. Ruining characterization. Oh, my apologies. Let me clarify. Basil in the hospital. Oh, thank fucking God. Right. Got very concerned. Need to give him a big old hug. I have to tell you something. Good. Do it. Let them decide. The characterization through the whole game had been consistent, with no question. Everyone was well defined, but had some depth to them as well. While this ending instead brings all of that into question. With Basil, we're shown how timid, kind and considerate he is, To then find out he assisted in moving the body is completely inconceivable to me, to the point that where I questioned why people in chat were convinced he did this of his own free will. I couldn't understand it at all. This isn't even down to like a hidden side of Basil's personality. Nothing in the narrative implies that. It's you know, it's acting like this is just something he would naturally do of the character we had met up to this point. I heard that he may have helped in order to keep the group together, but even as a kid, that's a very far stretch to me, that a kid would think to do that. Speaking of, let's talk about that point I mentioned earlier. Issue number 5. It's unrealistic. I actually understand this one better now. This is a mirror, right? It looks like it's a reflection of us. Obviously to show that it was us, but where's he got that from? We're outside, aren't we? There's a few issues with this. So first off, 2 children thinking to disguise the body to evade consequence, especially in this kind of way. Outside of special cases of mental illness or first degree murder, that makes very little sense to me that a kid would think to do that. The instinct would be to either run away, like attempt to run away, pretend they didn't do it when the body is found, or to confess and cry to their parents. What they did makes no sense for children. The brain and its ability to make decisions isn't even developed well at that point in life. Secondly, the method of death is quite unlikely, maybe not impossible, but especially for, you know, someone who's like a young adult falling down the stairs. It's not likely but not impossible is what I'm saying. It's a strange way of having her die. But third, this game seems to be set in the modern age, at least somewhat. So how did a forensics team not notice any damages related to Mary falling from a great height, especially if she died from it? It makes zero sense. There would be an investigation pretty quickly into how she died, and Sonny would likely get found out, as well as Basil. In most parts of the world, if Sonny is about 12 at the time, he's old enough for some criminal responsibility. Normally, I don't agree with things having to be realistic in a game. I usually don't find that like a good criticism, but until this twist, everything in the game was pretty grounded in reality outside of obviously headspace. But it's obvious why that's not based in reality. But when you're in the real world, it is grounded. Everything feels like you could see it in real life. So then we go on to issue number 6, the pacing. And in terms of like criticism for this game, the pacing was kind of strange in this game. You spend a lot of time, especially at the start of the game, you spend a lot of time as Omori, and then you spend a lot of time as Sonny. It kind of makes it hard to get a feel, a pace for the game. The game, when you're in the fantasy world, when you're doing combat, and the game when you're kind of going around talking to people, are quite different. So if you're in the mood for one, but you get the other, that's not the best. When playing the game before the ending, the one issue I had with the game that continued through to the ending was the pace of the game. In the main game you play as Omori for a long time, then thrown into Sonny for a couple of hours, then going back. The pacing felt uneven and weird, maybe partially by design as Sonny doesn't want to go outside. However, it is strange from a gameplay and narrative pacing point of view. But the ending feels even worse in this respect. You go from Humphrey, who isn't too satisfying of a final dungeon really, to suddenly having zero combat until the very end of the game. There are also several scenes from this point where running is disabled and parts drag out for too long, especially the part where you collect pictures. Despite misunderstanding the photos at first and thinking it was something even worse they were going to try and do badly, by halfway through I had already figured out what had happened, even if I wasn't happy about it. It made the final pictures and that gate sequence feel less like an emotional moment and more of just boring and feeling annoyance at how hard the game is trying to hammer it in. Some of the black doors were also confusing to navigate and too long. In addition, they were far too many in number for what the game was trying to express. You could have cut out a few and not lost much, in my opinion. I also felt like the street lamp sequence was too long and could have been handled differently, especially with my feelings that I did not forgive Sonny at all for what happened. And speaking of, we get onto the final issue. It might be the biggest one of all, really. Issue number 7. It lessened the impact of a fight with Omori. I don't fully know how to feel about it, so I feel very conflicted. Yeah, I feel kind of conflicted because I kind of feel this feeling. Things can go back to the way they were before. To me, this kind of conflicts with the idea that really there is no way it could go back to the way it was before. It won't. You can rebuild those bonds like we have, but it can't be the same. Your friends are wrong about you. The person they love isn't you at all. You're nothing but a liar, and when they see the truth, they'll hurt you as much as you hate yourself. Yeah, but I feel like the inner issue I'm having with myself on this is that I do understand more the other side, that I do understand Sudder's side. I felt for sure I would cry at this game, and I still nearly did at the end, but I still think the Omori fight would have broken me if it wasn't for the conflicting feelings of everything before it. And even worse was the dialogue, because, to be honest, I agree more with Omori. That's the biggest problem of all I felt with this ending. I was supposed to disagree with and push past Omori to want to defeat him, but in honesty, I didn't. You can see on the stream how I talk about what Omori is saying, and though I want Sonny to confess what he did, I don't see him as redeemable. The ending also turned my favourite character, Basil, into someone unrecognisable, and Sonny turns from a sympathetic character with little dialogue but visually expressed difficulties into a monster that isn't portrayed like a monster. If you learned of what Sonny did from an outside perspective, you would be justifiably angry. Even with the context that we get to see, there is no good reason for what happened, and Basil seems to help for very little reason. Because of all this, Omori felt less like an obstacle to overcome, a fantasy to break free from to live in reality, and instead felt more like a conscience trying to show Sonny the reality instead of the other way around. With everything I have said, I do not hate the ending. I felt like it was going to be much worse than it did. It was saved by that hospital scene in the good end, I have something to tell you. The strange dreamlike absurdity of a bad end, the interpretation that his friends at the recital are his idealised form of how his friends would react instead of a likely reality, and the strong final boss and the glorious music that accompanies it. It is a shame that the game went from being something I could recommend to non-gamers as a subversive exploration of mental health and dealing with loss, instead going to shock horror that treats suicide, guilt and depression/anxiety as means for a twist. So in that sense, I do not hate the ending, I hate the twist. And the ending went from being something that could have been amazing to just something that was pretty decent. Even though this vid is way more negative than I'd like it to be, I hope you understand my thoughts now that I've had time to think about the game and been able to express them more clearly. I still love the game and keep it in my favourite games for the moment, though it has dropped down a few spots in my mind from where it could have been. I do love twist narratives and being lied to by the game. Hell, my top 3 games are Metal Gear Solid 2, Kingdom Hearts 2 and Silent Hill 2, but this just felt sloppy and unneeded, when a more mature and thematically fitting ending was right there in plain sight. You could even keep the Omori fight and make it about letting go of the fantasy world and moving on from Mary and living life again. Feel free to leave your opinion below though. Please be civil with it. There's no single way to interpret the narrative, of course we have our different ways of how we see the game, but this is just mine. And please understand, the only reason I have so much to say and criticise is because I loved the game so much up until that point, and that's where the disappointment comes from. With that said, take care and have a good one.